go ahead and get started.
All right.
All right. Awesome. We've got on with us Kent Graziano. He is the techno du jour, Snowflake man. And we've known Kent for years and years. It's been great to be working with him over at Snowflake. And I reached out to Kent probably about a month ago, just saying, hey, I'd love to hear the full story of how you got on this train, because it's been such a ride, and
more of a rocket than a train.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's not a train. We've always said it's a rocket ship, man.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
And so that's really what I wanted to kind of broach today and talk about is like what were you doing before Snowflake, and how did you get into that circle of people that got you onto this?
Yeah. Wow. That's a pretty fun story. I mean, I've been in data for over 30 years, and I spent most of my career in the Oracle world. I was on the board of directors and even president of Rocky Mountain Oracle User Group and the Oracle Development Tools User Group, which are really two of the largest Oracle user groups in the world. Mm-hmm. And that's what got me into speaking. One of my mentors early on in Denver encouraged us to become evangelists on how to do things right in the Oracle space. So we did a lot of talks about how to build things properly, right? And how to use the tools and how to leverage the tools. And that was a great experience to lead up to this. Excuse me. So I've been through everything. I've been an independent consultant. I've been a data warehouse manager. I've been the lead architect, all those things. I think we've all been through that career.
Yeah.
1 second, guys. Sorry.
Now, is that a Snowflake mug?
Snowflake cup.
Let's see the logo.
Oh yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. Oh, of course.
That's one of the things with these Snowflake employees. They have all of their dinnerware and all the apparel and dinnerware of Snowflake.
That's right. I actually have a nice tumbler too for consuming adult beverages in. But so I spent all this time in data, and I was even an Oracle ACE director, which is basically their community evangelist, though, to be clear with everyone, I never actually worked for Oracle. People think that I worked at Oracle at some point, but I never did. I knew a lot of product managers at Oracle, and that'll come into the story here in a minute too. Yeah. So what happened, the way I got introduced to Snowflake was I actually was working on an agile implementation using my favorite data vault methodology with a team up in Denver. And I had, as well, Jared knows, I live in Texas now. I used to live in Colorado, so I had a lot of coworkers up there. So I'd actually flown up to Denver to do a face-to-face meeting because we'd been working on this project for a couple of months, all remote. And we said, well, let's get together in a room and actually see each other. Sounds familiar. Sort of thing where conversations we're having these days, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yes. Can we all do this in a room?
Yeah.
So I was up there, and then a buddy of mine who was the then president of the Rocky Mountain Oracle User Group had posted a meetup notice and said, hey, we're sponsoring a big data meetup at the University of Denver, which
what year was this?
This is 2015.
2015. Okay.
2015 now. So we're into 2015. Yeah, it was the summer, late summer, early fall 2015. And I actually am an alumni of the University of Denver. That's where I went. It's like, wow, I haven't been back to campus in years. I'm in town meeting with on this other project. Turns out I don't have anything to do that night. And the moniker for the thing was, we've got this new company coming in, Snowflake. They're going to talk about elastic data warehousing in the cloud. And I looked at that, and typical cynical guy who's been in the business for 30 years, I go, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Did we just string it? The only thing it didn't say was big data, right?
Or Hadoop wasn't in the sentence.
Hadoop and big data were not in the sentence. Yeah. And so I'm thinking, well, I'm going to go and I'm going to have a great time razzing these guys, right? I'm going to call BS on everything, because this just sounds like marketing crap, right?
Yep.
And so I get to the meeting, and it's two guys from Snowflake. So Kyle Rourke, who is been with the company over 6 years now with Snowflake. He is like the sales guy for the Western United States. And then a sales engineer, Todd Beauchesne, which who now is a product manager over at ThoughtSpot. Yeah, I figure you guys all know him because he probably trained you guys.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, so I've got the dynamic duo there, and there's like maybe a dozen people showed up for this thing, right? And none of us are economic buyers, right? So I'm sure they're looking. It's a bunch of Oracle DBA geek type folks, and then
early Snowflake days. I mean, that's who the audience was.
That's right. And so these guys start going to the demo and talk about being able to spin up an instance instantly in the cloud, and that we don't have to do any pre-provisioning and all that. And this project I was on was a SQL Server one. And I had two really interesting things happen there, which are very typical. The first day of the project, the VP says, how big a server should I buy for this data warehouse you're going to build for me? And I said, I have no idea. This is the first day. Can you tell me how much data you have? No, but it's a lot. Okay. How many users you're going to have? We're not really sure, but it's probably quite a few.
Right.
Okay. So I got nothing, right? I got nothing. And I said, why do you need to know now? He's like, don't you have servers? He's like, well, we've outsourced all of our hardware to a group that's offshore. Mm-hmm. And it takes about 6 weeks to get anything provisioned. Right. And mind you, this is a 3-month project.
Yep.
Right. And so it did literally take 6 weeks to get a SQL Server database up and running. And that I got access to it, got a login probably a day before the Snowflake meeting. Mm-hmm. And so I'm listening to this going, okay, well, if I'd known this 6 weeks ago, I would be 6 weeks ahead, because we would have just went and signed up for this service, because I already knew that the Oracle cloud solution at that time, the database as a service, was not that easy to configure. And I had heard stories from my other Oracle Ace friends that it was taking them, again, 6 weeks to go through the process to get it all set up. And here these guys are telling me in 24 hours, you can be up and running. And you don't need to know how big it's going to be. We just start, you load your data, it grabs the space, you delete the data. I'm like, okay, this is good infrastructure.
And that VP probably was not just asking you for dev environment. They wanted to know dev, QA, test, prod.
So well, he actually didn't
all these environments.
He actually didn't ask for that because he'd never been involved in data warehousing before in his entire career. So I knew I needed that, but he didn't actually know. That's one of the reasons I was on the project. But then it got better, right? So we can do this. And then they start talking about the separation of compute from storage, and we can have one cluster running ETL and another cluster running queries. And I'm going, no way.
Yeah.
That solved all the other problems I'd been having in my big data vault projects. It's like, okay, I don't have to I'm no longer restricted to batch processing at night so that the queries run during the day. Okay, that's mark number 2. And then they go, oh, and then this big data thing. How about semi-structured data? So it's not unstructured data. We're talking about JSON, Avro, XML. We call it semi-structured. And then they showed us an example of that. And then Tom goes and loads a bunch of JSON data into Snowflake, and then starts writing SQL to query it. And it's like,
which is
where's
for us.
Where's the ETL?
Yeah.
There isn't any. It's like, wait a minute, back up. How did you do that? I got so excited. I actually started tweeting at Claudia Imhoff during the meeting, and said I was part of the Boulder BI Brain Trust at the time. I was like, okay, if these guys aren't on our agenda, you need to put them on the agenda, because we need to do a deep dive. This is like amazing technology. Yeah. And I'm sitting here watching it happen, and it's a live demo. It's not slideware, right? It's not a architecture. Right. It's like, here Todd's in front of us, and he's in front of senior DBAs in the Oracle world who are, of course, grilling him. And he's running queries, and he's showing this stuff. And it's like, okay, that's amazing. So as a result of that, I came away going, okay, I got to follow this company, right? So I went out on Twitter and LinkedIn and started following them. And then about a couple of weeks later, I saw a tweet saying, hey, we're hiring. and they had a job description there. I went and read the job description, and went something like, we need somebody who's experienced, who knows how to speak to technical and non-technical audience, do public presentations at events, and write blog posts.
Right.
And I was like, seriously?
I could do that.
It's like, and my wife read that and she's like, that was written for you. And I said literally, and it's like, so yeah, I hope my boss isn't listening to this. I was doing that for free for 30 years, right? Right, because I was a consultant, or I was a manager. I was doing something, and this was, in the consultancies, as you guys know, you speak at conferences, because that's how you get your name out there.
Of course.
And that's your what they now call your social evidence that you know what you're doing.
Exactly.
Right, you write the blog posts, and like I said, very early on, one of my mentors had got us into being evangelists for the Oracle case tools, and that entailed teaching people how to use it the right way and how to think about it. And so I read this and I was like, well, yeah, I can. And since I'd seen the demo, what I ended up doing is I called Todd. Todd had a business card, and he had actually given me his business card. So I called him up and said, okay, tell me a little more about this company, because I'm thinking I want to apply for this job. And so he said, well, you know about our founders, right? And I was like, well, actually, no. Because you guys didn't say anything about the founders.
Right,
you just said you're a little startup in San Mateo. And so he directs me to the website and says, well, our founders, Benoit and Thierry, actually came from Oracle. And I went, wait, what? I've been in the Oracle world for 30 years, and you're telling me the guys who started this are some of the key architects behind my favorite features in Oracle? No. I looked and it's like, I must know these guys. I have to know these guys. And when I ultimately got to my interview with Thierry, I was like, I had just asked him, it's like, have we met before somewhere? We must have met, Oracle Open World something. And he's like, oh, no. We never go out. We're never public facing. Famous last words, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And now Benoit is doing keynotes, and he's, all over the place talking about his great product here.
Right.
So that was really funny. But what I found out is some of my good friends at Oracle had worked for them and had reported to them. And so when I started talking to people about Snowflake, no. And one of my buddies was like best friends with Thierry, played soccer with him. And so I got to go they were kind of the people in the back. They were the people behind the curtain doing a lot of this stuff. So they were the guys behind the curtain. Exactly. They were the guys that were authoring the patents, and the folks I knew were product managers who were the front lines, who were out working with the user groups and doing the presentations and educating us on how to do it. And so everybody, like I said, so many of the folks I knew had been with them before. And so I was easy, I went and talked to them, and, got nothing but rave reviews from all of them about how great they were to work for and how smart they were and all of that. And so, we'll say this is the icing on the cake. I was already sold on the technology, but then when I look at it, and you're looking at a startup, it's at that point, maybe 80 people in the company.
Right.
And it's in an office in San Mateo, and, you're going, well, does this thing have legs? Well, then I was already impressed with what they were able to do. But then I, met Benoit and Thierry and learned about their backgrounds, and my friends vouched for them. It's like, okay, so I know technically this thing has got it, right? It's got it going on. These guys know what the heck they're doing. Then you wrap in Bob Muglia, right? The CEO is from Microsoft. It's like, again, wait, what?
Yeah. A
former Microsoft guy is a CEO of a company founded by two Oracle guys.
Right.
Okay, like
it's got to be a good recipe.
Yeah, it's like that doesn't happen, right? Because we've all been in that world of this tension between Microsoft and Oracle. And it's like, okay, there's got to be something here that this guy who is way up, at the top of the ladder in Microsoft has thrown in with these two guys from Oracle.
Exactly. Now Bob had been there for what, 2 years up to that point, or I'm trying to remember.
So this was he was in there before they went GA. And of course, at the time, I didn't even realize that Snowflake had just gone GA probably 6 weeks before I saw that presentation. So
how did they connect with Bob? Because it seems like the networks would have been a little bit separated there, because I'm pretty sure that was Mike Spicer.
Did that. That, you know, he was the acting CEO. He was the, you know, the initial investor and founder who recruited Benoit and Thierry and put this whole thing together. And he realized that, you know, that was an interim thing. He needed to go get a real CEO for the next step. And so they went out and, you know, I'm pretty sure it was him that found Bob and brought him in, and Bob obviously fell in love with the product as well, like I did.
And what was, like, I keep thinking, because when Benoit did his presentation, I'm trying to remember when he did this presentation, but he talked about some of the early clients, and it seemed like a lot of the foundational stuff that had been built, the feature sets that got sort of stacked on top of that were just like feature requests basically from clients that were being deployed, but they were realizing like, wow, this is like incredibly flexible what we've been building here, because it allows us to add these feature sets. You know, like what was the feature set like, you know, in those really, really, really early years, like first client years?
Yeah, well, yeah, when I joined, so I joined in the end, this was the fastest interview and hiring process I'd ever been through. Once I flew out to San Mateo, did the interviews with a bunch of people, then I had to wait because who was it? Oh, Chris Degnan was out of town. Everybody was at a big summit in New York City. Mm-hmm. And so I had to wait for a call with him. And I actually didn't meet Bob. He was not part of my interview process, but I met him 3 days later, because after my interview, I flew back to Houston, and then I flew up to Colorado and drove to Boulder, because that Friday, the Boulder BI Brain Trust had Snowflake, and they had Bob Moglia and John Bach, and John Bach was the hiring manager who I was ultimately going to work for at the time. And so I got to meet Bob, but John had not had time to brief Bob. So Bob had no idea that I was interviewing for a job at Snowflake. So to him, I was another analyst. So I got like the unfiltered Bob, got to have lunch with him afterwards at a pub in Boulder, and got to see and get a real feel for him as a leader. Yeah. When he didn't know that I was actually considering coming to work for the company. Yeah. So I got to interview him without him knowing that I was interviewing him. Right? And that was just great. I mean, how often does that happen in your career, that you get to interview the CEO of a company as you're deciding?
You were still living in Boulder at the time, or
no? I was living in Texas.
Oh, you were in Texas by now.
I actually had flown up from Texas just for the BBT meeting, because it's like, I can't miss this opportunity to be there in person. I could have done it virtually, but I was like, no, I'm going in person for this. Right. Because then, of course, I got a chance to talk to Claudia afterwards about her impressions of Snowflake, and obviously she had a good impression, because when you and I first met in person in Austin, she was the keynote at one of our events, and I was backing her up with the Snowflake keynote.
Nice.
Yeah. So anyway, that was 2015. So in November 2015, I ended up taking the job with them. And at that point, I guess we have to think about what wasn't there in the product set at the time, right? Materialized views weren't there. They were in development. Mm-hmm. Data sharing, interestingly enough, was there, but nobody knew about it, because when I joined, I logged into the demo account that they set up for me, and there's 3 databases already there. Yeah. Well, that was a direct data share, except that we just said, oh, those are our demo databases. They're read only. We load those in another Snowflake account, and then we make it accessible to you. But we weren't talking about data sharing at the time.
Yeah. I remember when that started.
It was already there.
Yeah. I remember when that started getting talked about. I remember Bob Moglia talking about it, and we got introduced to Snowflake via a relationship we'd had with this gentleman named Lewis Housel. I don't know if you know.
Yes, Lewis. I know Lewis.
But before he got hired, he was calling me like, Jared, I got this company that's like, you know, I'm looking at, it's a company called Snowflake. It's a database. I'm like, a database? I mean, you know, because every database prior to that point was just another iteration on another database, right? It was always like, you know, someone's going to take a Postgres database and put a spin on it and release it, you know, kind of like Redshift was at the time, you know, And I was like, yeah, I don't know about a database. There's not much going on in that space.
Yeah. So, so what's so exciting about this thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, but he joined despite my skepticism. And then he was like, we need you guys to do POC stat. We need a POC done right now. And I'm like, okay, well, let's get started. And that's how we got started with all that. We had no partner contract in place. They didn't even have a partner manager at that time in those years.
Yeah, well, yeah, there was Walter Aldana was the partner guy. He was it.
Yeah.
He sat one desk away from me in the headquarters office. But yeah, at that early time, he had everything. He had the technical partners as well as any SI partners. And it was all on.
It was very loose knit though. Like there was no official contract, or like there was just, hey, can you help us out with something? And that's what, when we were doing this, it was just heads down. We got to get this client migrated into Snowflake. It was really Wild West.
No, that's the early days were certainly like that. There were a lot of on the fly demos and putting together whatever we could wherever we could. But yeah, I think the significant things that have been added is, of course, the data sharing being exposed to customers, because at the time customers couldn't do data sharing. And so when we rolled that out and called it the data share house at the time, and then of course came the Snowflake marketplace, and now the ability to build private exchanges between Snowflake accounts. And that's the thing that's evolved now all the way up to the data cloud, right?
Which is such a huge difference from.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's,
there's nobody really even talking about that. If there are people talking about it, it's they're nascent in their discussions about it. Whereas this is, pretty mature at this point.
Well, you start talking about data mesh and data fabric, which have become another buzzword. And I look at it and go, that's the data cloud, right? You can have the data. I mean, yes, it's Snowflake, right? It's got to be in a Snowflake account somewhere, or in a blob store attached to Snowflake via an external table. But to be able to have the data resident where the business needs it and the business is authoring it, and then be able to connect it through this vast network in with just a couple of clicks. And that's the thing that again is another game changer. The whole separation of compute from storage, which allows us to do that sharing because the storage is separate. That was the game changer from an analytics perspective, to be able to drive all these different workloads and really now get into, we can do data science. We can have a guy running a massive query on billion row feature stores while we're loading streaming data.
That was the hardest thing for me to accept. I could not accept that was a reality. I was like, and when someone told me that, I was like, that sounds like baloney. And I remember
technical term
baloney.
Yeah.
So, and we still see that all the time. Right? Anytime I do a training and work with clients, and they'll say, well, if we're loading this data, then we should keep people from running any queries here, right?
No.
We need, like, no, we're just fine. So
you just create another virtual warehouse. Yeah, and you're good. It's like,
they're like so confused, it's like when I tell my teenage daughter, it's time to clean your room. It's the same look,
right? Well, and when we were doing a lot of these workshops, and then you guys are still doing them virtually, but I don't get to have the fun that you guys do for that. But I'm excited to do them non-virtually again. But there's always this question that I throw out, and it's like, why is it that he was able to do that? And everybody's always just like, no, I don't know why. Like, that doesn't make any sense that you could sort of share the resource of your storage between reading and writing at the same time. It just doesn't, it makes no sense at all. And it's that mutable storage you got to start explaining.
Yeah, because up until then, disk was attached to the engine. I mean, there's no separation. And so one of the challenges is, folks are used to that sort of a model. I need to buy more memory for HANA. I need to buy more SAN space in order to support my existing database. And so that's the other side of it, where this whole idea of data cloud is changing things for people, because most of our customers and prospects think about Data lakes are something very, very different, and you need different technology in order to support a data lake versus what you'll do for a data warehouse versus what you'll do something to support your data science workbench. And so a lot of this retraining has taken place. And so that journey has been interesting. Just to go back on sort of Bob and the introductions, for me, even before conversations with Lewis, I remember Jared coming to me asking me about, Snowflake. I saw a video, a recording, and it might have been at one of the user conferences, and maybe it's the same one that you attended, where Bob was the speaker, and there were about 8 or 9 people in the room total, and he was describing sort of how this technology works. And I remember watching it maybe 3 or 4 times because I couldn't believe that this was possible.
It was probably one of our early meetups in San Francisco or somewhere, where Bob was speaking. Yeah.
Now, Terry, why is it so I see a lot of Benoit, and he does a lot of presentations, but Terry does not, seem to interface a lot. It's just either Benoit, but Terry is he just still focused on the product itself, and just he's in.
I mean, he's the CTO for the product, right?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he's Benoit's right hand, always has been. I mean, Benoit said he told Thierry he would not go do this without him, and they tried to synchronize their send of their resignation letters at Oracle, so that their bosses got the resignations at the same time.
Now, did and I don't know if they've talked about this part. I remember them talking about, when they left Oracle and started Snowflake, but did they have something in mind when they left Oracle, or were they just retiring?
Oh, no. They left Oracle to do Snowflake.
Okay.
So they already had started working out the architecture, and that was Mike Speiser efforts of working with Benoit, taking him to lunch, having chats. It's like, if you could do, and I think it was the conversation of, if you could do things differently, knowing what you now know after whatever it's been there, 20 years of architecture, looking at the cloud, how would you do it differently? And that's what sparked it. And in fact, Mike has said he had an idea in his head from his background of how he thought it would work. And he was interviewing, database experts all over the world to find somebody who could potentially execute on this. And the one thing I remember him saying in one of our meetings, one of our early sessions, is that when he presented it to Benoit said, "Okay, I see where you're going, but you're wrong. That's not the right architecture." And then he got up and drew on the whiteboard and said, "This is the way I think it needs to go." And it was the first, nascent drawing of our multi-cluster shared data architecture. And, I think Mike at that point realized, it's like, well, of all the people I've talked to, this is the first guy who got it, but then challenged my approach and presented me with a solution that really makes sense. And, that's kind of what got the ball rolling. And then he, it progressed into, okay, let's do this thing. And Benoit saying, well, the only way I do it is if Thierry comes with me. And he said, okay,
let's do it.
Let's do it. And that's, that's how it all really got started was with that. It was an idea. And if you watch, there's a video of, floating around out there on YouTube of Benoit and Thierry about, it's kind of a brothers from different mothers sort of thing, right? About the 2 French guys from small towns in France that, had these ideas about data and how they ended up forming Snowflake. It's really a fun video. And that's one of the few places that you'll see Thierry. There's a couple of little video vignettes with him talking when he and Benoit are talking about the formation of Snowflake. So it's really quite fun. But in the end, Bob, one time he had to do a lecture for a university there in the Bay Area, and he chose to do it on the history of databases. And then he recounted that at a all hands meeting one time and was going through, and he had this great timeline about how the databases evolved and Stonebreaker's theories that led to, MPP and all of that. Mm-hmm. And then he got up there and I was looking at it, and in the middle of the thing, it's like, wait a minute. I'm looking at the timeline. It's like, do you guys realize that what you just said, Bob, is there has not been a new academic architectural theory on databases for 30 years. It was Stonebreaker, and then it was Benoit and Thierry. And that was the SIGMOD paper that they authored. And looking at data, it had been 30 years with basically no real innovation in the database space, which is why you did. This is why you didn't believe it, right?
That was my reaction. My reaction was like, it's just recycling the same stuff, like it was, someone was just going to create a new version of Postgres,
But it wasn't.
Yeah.
See, that's the thing, is the outside world didn't know is that the architecture was based on a new theory of architecture that, this multi-cluster shared data thing, it was brand new.
Yep.
And it was, and as Benoit has always said, it's like, you couldn't do it before the cloud.
Right.
With like you said, Arkady, everything was hooked together, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It was hard coupled.
That's right.
Right. We didn't have loose coupling of storage and compute. It was hardwired in a box, which ultimately ended up either under somebody's desk or in a data center if it was big enough, right? And you just couldn't do that. So that's why so much was just, okay, we had some open source things and some people tweaked it here and there because it was open source, and we got some new cool features, but nobody could really solve that problem for analytics of, man, we need to get to near real time. We need to be able to load data on a regular, ongoing basis, but we can't disrupt the business. So how do you do that? Well, you separate, way we had to do it in the old days was we just had to have a massive box. And even then, if it was good at parallelism, the first job in there could grab everything, and then nobody got anywhere until that job finished, right?
That's right.
You basically locked up the machine, and it was great. I mean, I remember watching MPP demonstrations where they throw a massive query out there against billions of rows and terabytes of data, and you'd watch the CPUs will go boing to 100%. And it's like every CPU on the thing is done, which means nothing else can happen until it comes off. Okay, so if it was a small job, right, and it ran in a couple of seconds, great, then more stuff could go in. But if you're talking about loading massive amounts of data, forget it. You just couldn't do it. You're bottlenecked.
That's right. And it was such especially in doing where it really kind of seeped into me how big a change this was is when we started doing our in-person workshops. We did the first Zero to Snowflake. It was a tiny, what was that, a hotel or something?
It was a hotel. Yeah.
Yeah. And they put us in a hallway, we're doing this presentation on Snowflake, and it was a hands-on session. And we had everybody loading at the same time. And it was like, holy cow. I mean, people in there were like, wow.
That was on one account, right? It was one database. Yeah, you didn't even bother provisioning.
Exactly. It was Intricity account. We provided the student IDs for everybody, and we made sure that they stayed within their student account so that at least they could see the fact that we can get all of this parallel loading. The event in Miami was a lot of fun. I mean, it was a tiny little room with people sitting one on top of another. Certainly
they had
before
their knees
COVID days.
Connected to each other. Yeah.
Yes. It was pretty neat.
But I mean, those early years in explaining this, because you knew that basically everybody in the room had never experienced anything like this before.
You couldn't.
And you still deal with that today. I mean, today when we're, kind of helping people over the learning hump of how this stuff works, we still get like, what? How are you doing all this parallel work?
And Jared, we talk about this a lot. For us as practitioners, the world has changed dramatically. Just the comment, Kent, that we talked about, provisioning accounts and doing. We would typically spend anywhere between 6 to 8 weeks on planning out the account. How much? What do we need? How big a box? If it's virtualized, if it's physical, going through all of those kinds of things. It's 2 months of life that we never get back.
That's
you
right.
know, that little piece.
Yeah.
And then the worries about how do I copy data and how do I back up data and
Yeah.
what's my recovery strategy and how do I load in parallel and how do I do context switching? All of those things have changed. So for us as practitioners,
That's
we could
huge.
focus on the value to the business rather than on the architecture.
Yeah, and even that was one of the things early on when I was giving early talks about Snowflake. I always said, you know, my background is as a data architect and a data modeler.
Right.
And what Snowflake means to me is that I can now design the system to solve the business problems, and I don't have to worry about the nuts and bolts of storage or tuning or partitioning. None of that is in. I don't have to wait for a DBA team to come and help me tweak the design so it performs. I just do it, and it's done. So that the time to value is just incredible. It's like, like you said, we just cut out several months of upfront preparation work before you could even think about starting to load data in and run queries.
Yeah, the other day I opened up a process diagram, and it was it was a real old one, Arkady. It was back from like it was probably 2010, 11.
Yeah,
12,
really old, like 10,
well,
you know.
in our world of Snowflake,
ago.
that's a long time ago in this world. But I opened it up and it had the very first meetings were on hardware, and then it had this dotted line all the way to when you got the hardware.
Yeah.
You know, so like you do the entire strategy, and the entire strategy had to be done before hardware got provisioned so that you could do it.
Dell used to be our favorite because they could build and ship servers faster than anybody, so we could shave 2 weeks off. But yes, that was the life we lived.
Oh,
yeah. And now you go sign up for a free trial account at Snowflake. You put it in, and in 15 minutes, you've got an email with a login. Yeah. And it's like, okay, wow. And it's like you don't have time to go get coffee and come back, and you've got it, right?
Yeah, the other part was that the servers themselves had to be sized just right, you know, and you didn't know what you were building. You didn't know, I mean, for sure, like how much data we would end up having. And I mean, just to have that go away is such a massive thing. It was a huge event for us.
Well, you know, and it's interesting because you still see that some of that is ingrained in these folks. When I go work with a client and you go look at their virtual warehouses and the names are Consumer XL. And, you know, because the thinking was, we've got to plan what size we need this warehouse. And I keep telling them, don't name it small, don't name it extra small, because you're going to change that on the fly. But it's part of that that's been ingrained in us for so many years because there were no changes. It's always been, like you said, somebody would reimagine something that would help make one piece of it a little bit easier. But then there were a whole bunch of new challenges that made things just as difficult. So
I have my favorite CIO down in Florida, and I had to stake my reputation that Snowflake can do what it can do, and that we can keep it on budget. And so we made a bet that I happened to win because we Snowflake delivered. But those expectations are really difficult for people because they think, you know, elastic scalability. How do I forecast? How do I predict? How do I manage these things? So that's the other side of it that's been always interesting in terms of education.
So time goes by, and obviously it was a great idea to bring in Slootman and bring them to the IPO. I mean, that was a big deal.
Oh yeah.
On the transition of Muglia, you know, I don't know how much you could talk about the transition of Muglia, but you know, he was a really big team builder there. I remember him being a great team builder, and he did a lot of good work there. You know, is there anything about that transition you could talk about, or is it, you know?
It's what's been published. Yeah, I mean, I was here in Houston, so I got the email like everybody else saying, that, you know, thanks, Bob, for all the hard work and getting us to where we are. Welcome, Frank.
Yeah, exactly.
You
well,
know,
and I don't think Bob would protest the crazy success that his stocks have or his.
Oh no. Well, especially when Warren Buffett bought up a bunch of his shares right before IPO day.
Yeah, that's great.
That's a good show of confidence. I mean, his investing strategy is about moats. Having what kinds of companies have a good moat around them that makes it difficult to copy their technology and or whatever their strategic differentiator is. And he only invests in companies that have that. And I do think Snowflake has that in that they are in many ways on the technology, of course, but on the data sharing side, that is the first in to that world, the data exchange, the one that's first, kind of like Apple was first with their app.
First mover, yeah.
That's right. That's
first mover advantage. Yeah,
exactly. That's right. That network is really matters, and we saw it with COVID. I mean, when the COVID thing happened, all of a sudden it was like we need data. We need this data like right now, and no other platform was talking about COVID data availability. They're the only ones.
And thankfully we had Star Schema who said, hey, we can make this easy for everyone. We'll go do the hard work and harvest this data from all these authoritative sources and make it analytics ready. And then we'll host it on the Snowflake data marketplace. And that was probably one of the greatest data for good efforts. Certainly in our lifetimes, right?
Yeah.
And it served a major, and still does, because now they've integrated the vaccine information in there. So before it was just the COVID, infection rates and all of that all over the world. Now it's got the vaccine information in it. So as things are transitioning and people are looking at the demographics and see, say where have people been vaccinated, where haven't they been vaccinated? How's that going to affect my business reopening plans? Am I in an area where the vaccination rate is high enough that I need to go staff up? I need to go hire people because the business is reopening. Incredible value for, across everything. Initially folks thought, well, hey, this is great for healthcare, right? Make it more visible. But then, it's like government agencies, education institutes, the schools trying to figure out, how are we going to bring big kids back to physical school here in the United States?
Well, and COVID affected everybody. Everybody got affected by COVID.
So it turned out that everybody needed the data.
That's right.
And data that's not unprepared, data that thousands of people and entities had to go and put schema around. So as a data architect, as a data modeler, you think about the world that we used to live in before, which is, sharing of data was flat files coming in a secure FTP, and then you have to put schema around it. Now you've got that ability to share.
Right. And I think that's what we saw in the last decade here was really kind of the failure of Hadoop and data lake / data swamps, is that it just required so much knowledge and expertise to get value out of it. It was great. We saved all this data and we were able to store it cheaply, which we couldn't do before, but it's a lot of effort. We still talk about data scientists having to spend nearly 80% of their time preparing the data.
Yeah, I call it data munging. You've got data munging going on rather than the value added activity. I talk about the triangle and turning it upside down. Let's not do that. Let's let the data scientists be what they are.
Jared and I were on a webinar just a while back. With Sarah, and there's somebody in the company said, hey, it would be great if we could look at some COVID information and how that would affect us. And they said, okay. So about, what was it, like 2 hours later?
Well, no, she said, go check out this COVID data thing that Snowflake's got on their data share. And she's thinking like next week I might get a response about, this data being available and maybe we should look at it. No, it was, go ahead, Rich.
It was like an hour later. She said, here it is. It's all ready to go. And I've already reviewed it. And, here we've got some.
We can start writing queries now.
Yeah.
It was like, what?
Ready. Okay.
That changed, that actually changed the data sharing, the data exchange really changed my perception about the how much it's changing the modality of data sharing. So, and what I mean by that is, in the old world, I would always think about a third-party data brokerage company as like this. You sort of had to have this long-term relationship in play because there was such a huge process involved in onboarding that data.
That's right.
Because you got all these FTP files and these managed file transfers that were happening, and you had to really set up a lot to get that to happen. So if you had a data brokerage company, you were making a commitment for years and years and years. Well, a lot of the time organizations, they couldn't tactically enrich their data because it took so much time to do.
Right.
What we're seeing with the data shares or the data exchange is that people can have those long-term relationships, of course, but they can also be very tactical about it. And they could just say, hey, I want to bring something up. Hey, just for this week, I need some information, So it's very powerful.
Right. Yeah. Because the friction's gone there. The level of effort it's a couple of clicks.
Yeah. It's no longer a project.
Well, and even on the data provider side, I know we've got new data providers now that are, have never been data brokers before, because it was going to require so much engineering, because they've got to, manage, they've got the data, they've got to prepare the data, and then they have to figure out what format are we going to export it in order to make it available to customers. And then, of course, negotiate, the ins and outs of all of that. How often will we refresh it? Now they build a database in Snowflake, and they put it in a share and put it on the exchange and on the marketplace and make it available. And then it's nearly instantaneous. And obviously the preparation, there's some thought and all that goes into that, like what Star Schema did, right? Like I said, their data scientists did the hard work. They set up the pipeline to get that data once. But isn't this great? I mean, instead of 1,000 companies going to the Johns Hopkins website and downloading a bunch of flat files and trying to build their own process to do that on a daily basis because the numbers were changing so rapidly, one company did it, and then passed it on to all the rest of us. I mean,
it's huge.
Wow. I mean, that's just, it's
the
huge.
number of man hours saved is huge. It's just a huge amount of hours.
And it meant the value of the data, right? The value of the data is there now, because so many companies that may have wanted to do it, but just, I don't know how we're going to pull this off. Well, okay, here it is. Like what you're saying, Rich, an hour later, we're already running reports against this data. We're joining it to our own data because it took 3 clicks and a couple of minutes. We now have access to this massive schema, and it's going to take us longer to figure out what data is in that schema than it did for us to get access to the schema.
Right.
Well, all right. So another great example.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say another great example. I remember for years working with retail, and saying, wow, it'd be really nice if we can run this analysis and look at the weather in the area and those types of things. And and the hoops that we had to jump through to be able to get weather information, to see if there's traffic in your store was less when it was raining, and what products are you selling right before a storm, and all of those to get that weather information, to get it so we could use it in our analysis was ridiculous. But now it's you pull it in, and you pull in a JSON set of weather data on a regular basis. It's right there. It's available for you. You can query it, and it's just unbelievable.
I mean, it's for years I tell people that one of the what at the time was a pipe dream of pretty much every data warehouse manager in the world was to be able to augment the company's analytics with third-party external data. And like you said, it entailed, well, I got to find out who has the data. How do I get it? I got to negotiate a contract with them. And then I still got to have engineers and ETL developers to figure out how to pull it in. And what if they change the structure, and how often do we do it? And now it's just, it's so easy. And now we're finding out data scientists wow, yeah, they love it, right? Because
it
is. It's the data is prepared. They don't have to do the data wrangling.
Yep.
There's metadata there, so they know the context of the data. They can see relationships between the data, and now it's a matter of, okay, which data set do I need or want for my machine learning model?
And that's what you realize. Yeah, you realize that data science guys, half the time, they're just wanting to take what we've got and add some more information to it. That's half of what they're attempting. And just to have that done where it's just ready to be queried, it's amazing. Now we got 10 minutes left, and I've got to have you comment on what the IPO process was like.
Okay, so yeah, I'm wearing my snow day shirt from that. We all got a box at home with because it was remote, with our snow day shirt and some other swag to go with it.
Yeah,
and it was, it was pretty frenetic for sure. Because at the same time, of course, Frank was saying, "Well, look, guys, yes, the IPO," and as he constantly says, it's a once in a company time. Yeah. Right. It's a point in time. We still have to deliver. We have customers we're working with. We have product we're developing. I'm still out evangelizing, Snowflake. But we had the snow day, and we actually had an online thing with the New York Stock Exchange where we actually had a live private company video like this going with interaction and talks from different people, and some of our customers came in and congratulated us on all of that. But the thing that was so exciting really for me was that whatever it was, like 2 days before, whenever it was, when Warren Buffett jumped in and so cool. That hit the news wire, because then even my mother-in-law was talking to my wife and going, "Well, I see Warren Buffett is buying into this company that Kent's working for. There must be something there."
Well, that's the other thing that certainly for us, the recognition of Snowflake post the IPO is dramatic. Even my mother-in-law knows what Snowflake is at this point.
Yeah. So that was very exciting. Of course, we had to do it all virtual, but internally, our chief marketing officer, Denise, is phenomenal at these things. I mean, we set up. It was just an amazing experience for all of the employees, even though we all had to be remote. And some of the employees who lived in the New York City area did venture out and walked over there to front of the New York Stock Exchange and did some selfies in front of it. Just so a couple people were able to get out there. They obviously weren't able to get together, but they were able to kind of be there and say, "Hey, I was there in front of the New York Stock Exchange when the opening bell rang and when Snowflake hit the market." And actually, they scheduled our event for like 2 hours. And after 2 hours, if you guys were following it, we had not actually come onto the open market yet. The bell had rung. All the stuff was going on behind the scenes, but there was just so much demand that they couldn't get it on before we actually finished our event. And so I was watching it on CNBC and got on and got to see Frank. Frank was on there live. And so they had Frank talking right at the time that it hit for open trading. Right. And we're just watching it, and we're watching that stock ticker go up and up. And we had, my family and I were just looking, it's like, no, that can't be right. Right. Our opening price was supposed to be 120.
Yeah.
And then it ended up, when it actually opened on the market, was 250.
Yeah.
And then it just went up. And then when it went over 300, we were like, wait a minute, it's more than Salesforce. It's you're watching the stream, the ticker across the bottom of all the major companies, and you're looking at the Snowflake one going up and up and up, and we're looking, it's like, we just passed them. It's like, this can't be happening. This is insane. And it was weeks before we got the explanation because none of us understand the inner workings of the stock exchange that well. It's like, why did it take so long? It's, well, he said, we had a lot of people who wanted to buy, but there wasn't anybody willing to sell.
Yeah. There weren't any sellers. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. I guess that's a good problem to have. But it was, so going from, I go back to, when I joined there in November of 2015, there was barely 100 people in the company. We were only US based. So I got to go through that growth of when we opened the office in London with 3 guys. Right. And then a couple of months later, there was maybe 6 or 7, and we went over to London and we did a data cloud day with Bob and a bunch of others. And we ran an all-day event at this place called The Bank in London, which was just big open space in an old building. And we were all there set up, and we had over 500 people register for this. And I think 350 showed up. And it was to the point that they actually were going around and the marketing team's telling us, okay, anybody who works for Snowflake, you guys can't sit in the chairs. We have so many people coming. We don't have enough chairs for everybody who's probably going to now show up. So we were like sitting on the stairs and hanging out in the back. And even those of us who were speakers, so Todd and Steve and I all ended up on the stage along with Bob speaking. It's like we had to sit off in the wings. Like we couldn't sit in the audience to watch any of the talks. And it was an all-day event. And it's like, okay, we got something here. But the question of, are we going to take off in Europe? Yeah, within a couple of months, it's like, oh yeah. And so going through that and watching that growth, and then expanding into Australia and now into Japan and Singapore and all over the world, and just watching the company grow so much. And we've hired, I think the number was like 800 people during the pandemic. Wow. We have 800 employees who have never been to the Snowflake office that have been working for us over this last year.
That's incredible.
As we grow. And we're going to continue to hire. So again, the IPO is allowing us to do that and expand. Because as you guys are seeing, right, the demand seems unending. And it's just growing.
Yeah. And we've seen it from the perspective of just the size of companies that are moving onto Snowflake now. That, in those early years, it was a lot of startups. There was a lot of companies you had never heard of, but were major players in data. Like it was like, whoa, but then all of a sudden this has been happening for years now, but it's like, it's name brand companies, and it's their whole strategy is it's not a little portion of the strategy.
We are the data platform.
That's right.
For the company, right? And what we now are talking about with a lot of companies is we're building we are the data cloud for that company, because we're talking about these big companies that are multinational. They're truly global, and they, for regulatory reasons, in some cases, they can't have all the data in one place, right? There's privacy things, and they're able to now do that with the data cloud, where there is no other technology you could do this with and have it be this easy.
That's right.
Right. And deliver the value so quickly. It's just, it's I'm still amazed. Right.
Yeah.
5 years in, it's like crazy.
It's about simplifying that complexity.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. I still wake up in the middle of the night and pinch myself. I'm like, what? I can really do this now? For 25 years, I haven't been able to do this, and now I can.
It does make the work we do a lot of fun. It makes it a lot more fun than it used to be. It used to be so much drudgery. So
we'd like some OLTP capabilities to come in.
So let's bring that in, Kent. Is that, maybe, okay. He was quiet there. You see it's coming out during Summit.
Like,
why not, right?
Left. We gotta,
all right.
There's a big demand for high volume, low latency.
Yes, there is.
As we move into real time and streaming, and edge computing and IoT, all of that. Yeah. So there's, look forward to, I guess we need to talk about the Summit here is in 3 weeks here.
So that's the next big thing that's happening is Snowflake Summit, and we'll definitely be there. And it's going to be, I think what I'm really excited about is just kind of see there's always some announcements that are made there that are exciting for us to.
Yes. Yeah. I can guarantee you that there will be some really fun announcements, and I'm sure you guys will be listening keenly.
Yes. When
Christian does his product management update.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll definitely be listening in. Kent, it's been great to have you on our Data Sharks video stream. And we'll connect with you maybe after Summit to see see what your impressions are and whatnot. So
yeah, it'll be a lot of fun things to talk about then.
Awesome.
All right.
Well, thanks everybody for joining. Like, share, and subscribe if you can. If you're hearing this on our podcast, then give us 5 stars if you have some stars to give. So we'll catch you all later. Thanks again. We'll see you all.
Thanks,
Have an
everyone.
excellent day, everyone. Thanks.
All right.
Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Kent. I've turned off the live stream.